continue to play this, and then I'll go directly and read through the chart and the history. But I think it's worth listening to this because of the history that it gives, and the context that it gives for the historical chart that I'm going to show you.
3 pedophiles openly talk about pedophilia and why they do it and how they do it, but all I can say is, as a factual matter, there is nothing like this recording in Australian history, and you know, there's a very good reason why the ABC wanted to keep this recording secret, because it is just, what they're talking about is criminal misconduct, and obviously the ABC was promoting crimes and trying to normalise crimes.
Get that? Right, the ABC was promoting crime because it was criminal misconduct, and they were trying to normalise crime. And then they tried to cover up for it later on when inquiries were made about this tape.
In 1975, and you know, people listening to it in the last week and a half have just been completely horrified that their tax dollars 50 years ago could ever finance, you know, a piece of filth like what happened.
That's the point too, and you'll see when I get to the chart, most of the things that have been suppressed are things that have been funded by the people of this country, right? The taxpayer dollars have actually gone into either providing the means or the method or the wherewithal to obtain the information, and then it is systematically and systemically suppressed by the government, even though the government is supposed to be representative of the people and do the bidding and the will of the people, and is using the people's money in order to create this stuff, to create this content, or unearth and investigate the information and compile it and archive it. Yeah, they compile it, they archive it, and then they forbid the people from actually examining it and seeing it for what it is. And the people that are involved, that's what they're really doing. They're covering their own backside and their cronies.
Back in 1975.
Yeah, I was pretty astounded. It is out on your X account. I've reposted it on my feed as well. I listened to it. I couldn't, you know, I turned it off at a point where I just couldn't listen to it anymore. It really started to get really in depth. I don't know if graphic's the right word. I mean, there were some.
So John Adams said that the ABC had basically put a caveat. He had to sign an agreement that he wasn't allowed to share the information with the public in any way. He gave snippets of it in their first report with Martin North in the interests of the people. He read out snippets of it to give you an idea of what was there. I exhorted him in the comments to actually put it out there regardless. And it turns out that on the 13th of October, he did release it. It was put out on YouTube. YouTube took it down. The ABC threatened to come after him legally. YouTube took it down, but he also put it out on his X account, and it's still there. And then other people have copied it and shared it on Rumble and Instagram and other places. So it's now out in the wild, so as to speak.
Discussions about the acts, but just the way that they talked about this is completely normal, and they talked about it in a way as if they were predatory and that was okay. Yeah, they were saying, well, and then the host asked, like, you know, how can you get away with this? Why would you do this? And they said, and their excuse disgusted me. It was, well, this already goes on anyway, and somebody's going to do it if we don't. And so that justified, you know, their actions, and they just seemed to not have.
So these people are absolutely depraved and evil people. That should tell you enough right there. Just their attitude.
Any sort of care about the effect on, you know, the children that they were involved with. And one other point, was on the tape and that you talked about in one of your videos was that not only were they doing this with young boys, but also, and they would go looking for, young boys where they would be, whether it be school or whatever the case is. But beyond that, that there was a network of pedophiles and that they started meeting these young boys at other pedophiles' houses. So the scope of this went beyond just the three gentlemen on the program. And that's at the point where I was starting to disconnect.
And that's what really comes into view, is that there is a massive network. There is a massive pedophile network that services the needs of these people, not only here in Australia, in the upper echelon of society in Australia, but also in America. America is just as bad, if not worse, and there's actually an interchange between the two countries. The network spreads across the Pacific, mate, and it actually spreads into just about every Western country and culture, and into the Middle East as well, and into Southeast Asia. That's why I say this problem is pandemic. The evil is well and truly entrenched in this world, mate, and it's because we've done nothing about it.
Connect from it and say, you know what, because, I had flashbacks to the Epstein stuff, to, the reports of Pizzagate, whether or not that was real or not. But all of that, and,
No, Pizzagate was real. I looked at the evidence. They had official documentation from high-ranking people that showed the validity of Pizzagate. And they had enough evidence on Elephantis to put him away, but he was protected. He was protected. He even admitted to it himself. He basically cut his own throat and still didn't go down for it.
It was just astounding that made the right. Even in 1975, I know that the 70s was a different time. It was much more permissive time, especially sexually. But that particular content, to make it on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, a major radio station, was just astounding. And what's even more astounding, John, is that you were able to get a copy of the tape. I mean, I guess enough time passed, people have forgotten about it. Like, when you called them, did you say, hey, this is the content of the tape? Or did you just say, hey, I want the episode from this day? And did they seem to have any idea what they were handing over to you?
Well, sure. So 2 points that I'll say in response. So to the second point, so when I emailed the ABC, I actually included the link to the Gerald Henderson article. So Henderson in 2015 wrote about the pedophile tape. So I basically said, this guy, Gerald Henderson, in this column talks about a 1975 recording called Pedestry. Do you have a copy of it? And they said yes. So they knew what I was asking for. However, the woman who handed me the recording, dare I say, I don't think they ever heard the recording, because if they actually heard it, maybe they would have had second thoughts about ever showing it to me. So again, maybe with the passage of time, people didn't understand what was on the recording, how significant it was. But again, how did I get it and no one else got it? Maybe that's just luck. But now. The other point I always make is kind of like what I said before. Gerald Henderson, who knew about the tape, he never went to get it. People in Parliament never went to get the tape because the ABC told Parliament it doesn't exist. Yeah. So no one had any.
There you go. So people in Parliament tried to get the tape, and the ABC openly denied its existence, deliberately suppressed that information and lied about it.
Motivation to actually ask the question, hey, do you actually have this? And maybe I'm the first person in Australian history in the last 50 years to go to the ABC point blank.
Right. So the ABC is a government department that's funded by taxpayer money. Just like that sinking. And you don't think the government is covering up? You'll see.
And say, hey, do you actually have this in your vault, in the archive vault? and they actually fessed up and said, yeah, we do have it. So quite extraordinary about how I got the tape, because people think, well, I mean, that I may have connections or there was some grand strategy behind this. No, I just sent an email and said, hey, there's an article here. Talks about this recording. Do you have it? And they said, yeah, we got it. So it was a simple story, but there we go there. Now, one thing I'll say, Rob, is that in the 1970s, there was an entrenched pedophile network in my state of New South Wales. And it went through Sydney, it went through to the north of the state, and it went to the south of the state. So I live in a place called Wollongong, which is about 90 minutes south of Wollongong. And in the 19...
Wollongong, man, MK Ultra Central, that place. From what I've seen in my research, there's a lot of bad stuff goes on in Wollongong. And the second thing I want to say too, it wasn't just in the 1970s. It was still current. It was still currently operating in the 1990s, right? And they didn't dismantle it even then. So it is still current, operating today. I have evidence of the American connection to that network, right? Still operating in the 1980s and into the 1990s, and connected with a man who is in the position of greatest power in America at this very hour, was connected with that network. The evidence is there, mate. I went and dug it out. I went and dug it out back in 2020. And then again in 2022, but I had the American stuff. Some of that was easier to find than the Australian stuff, and I dug that out back in 2020 and 2021.
In the 60s, we had a mayor called Tony Bevan. He's one of the most notorious pedophiles in New South Wales history. He wasn't just a pedophile; he was actually a pimp. And so we had a Royal Commission in the 1990s looking at police corruption, and one of the elements that the Royal Commission looked at was police protecting pedophiles. And so there's a 600-page report that talks about the pedophile network happening.
Yeah, right. That 600-page report is currently suppressed underneath several layers of government suppression. And that was paid for through the Royal Commission by the taxpayers of Australia, of the Commonwealth of Australia. The people of the Commonwealth of Australia paid for that, and they're not allowed to see the information that they paid for. There was over $64 million spent back in 1995 to produce that 600-odd page document and report, and in the investigation that went into that. And the second thing there that he points out is that the police are doing the dirty work for the politicians and the members, the higher ranking members of the judiciary. The police are the ones that are doing their dirty work in covering it up, and they still are to this day.
New South Wales, and the role that police actually play to protect these people, and they talk about this guy called Tony Bevan and what he was up to, and the only pedophile they labelled as evil was Tony Bevan. So that was a guy from the 1960s, and then we had this guy from, I think, 1973 to 1991, a guy called Frank Arkell, and he was also a pedophile, and he was also one of the people interviewed during in terms of the Royal Commission in the 1990s. So,
yeah, Frank Arkell was also part of the political class. He was a politician.
So now, one thing I'll say, Rob, is that after we did our first show on YouTube, I had a documentary maker from Sydney contact me who's been looking at this issue and making a documentary over the last 18 months. He said I needed to meet someone who was from Sydney, and this person came down and I met this person. And back in the 1970s, this person was actually he was taken from his home by the government. He was placed into foster care, and then he was basically pimped out into this pedophile network. And this was a massive problem in the 1970s where children.
I believe we've met this individual too. He came and spoke to us several times at the Governor-General's in Canberra, outside the Governor-General's in Canberra, when the people of the Freedom Front, under the Exposer 28 banner, were addressing the Governor-General and demanding that the Governor-General release this information to the people of Australia. I won't mention his name, but yeah, I believe I've met the same individual and spoken to him, shook hands with him, heard his story, talked to him, prayed for him.
Children from dysfunctional homes were basically taken from were taken from their parents by the government, and obviously the whole and very similar system in the United States about putting children in a better environment for their upbringing. But in the 1970s, a number of these people were actually pushed into these pedophile networks, and this has been a major scandal. And so this man that I met a few weeks ago, he was basically...
It's not just a scandal, man. It's the shame of us. It's the absolute shame of this nation. The fact that it's still covered up and suppressed, and that the people of this country won't do anything about it. Because the government is not going to do anything about it. They're the ones that are actually actively engaged in suppressing this information and trying to cover their own backside and cover up for their cronies. So it's up to the people to actually get on board and do something about this. And it would, if the people did, if this was actually exposed and these people were brought to justice, it would remove a very dark blot from the history of this country.
Boy prostitute in the 1970s, and he operated in Sydney. He operated in my town of Wollongong, so he has first-hand experience of what he did, what he was forced to do, and then obviously all the other people that were involved in. And so he came from a part of Sydney where there was about 50 boys who were in state care that were pushed into this network. And he basically said that every single person except for him is basically dead, either from suicide or drugs or mental health issues. But the trauma of the pedophilia basically killed.
I believe the only reason this guy is alive is because he turned to the Lord Jesus Christ by his own testimony. He claims to be a Christian and to have found redemption in Jesus Christ. So out of 50 guys, man, the one that turned to the Lord is the only one that's still alive. Consider that. And still able to give testimony against these people and to speak of the truth of what's actually going on in this country.
49 out of 50 men, and there's only one man standing, and I just had the opportunity to speak to that person about 3 to 4 weeks ago, and it was just a very extraordinary sort of first-hand account of, you can talk about this issue of pedophilia, you can listen to the tape, and then you can actually talk to one of the last remaining survivors who actually was forced to do these sexual acts, and he's still alive to be able to tell the story of what actually happened during that period of time. The one other thing that is probably significant for an American audience, Rob, is that in 2015 there was a senator in the federal parliament called Bill Heffernan. He made a very famous speech about elite judges, politicians, and lawyers being pedophiles and being protected for the last 30, 40 years. And he actually had a police document which he says that had 28 names on a list, including a former Australian Prime Minister, and these were all alleged pedophiles. So ever since that...
So to give you a bit more clarity on that too, it was more than just a single document. It was a number of documents giving 28 names, and that was one set of documents that listed the 28 people. And then there was another set of documents that he had, so he actually referred to in that speech, he referred to two sets of documents, one with the 28 names, that was the older set of documents that were actually police documents, police reports, that were signed off and verified by a Queen's Counsel from Queensland, called Gary Crook, and arose out of the investigations that were done into police corruption in Queensland under the Fitzgerald inquiry back in the 1980s. That is where that list of 28 names originated, and it had the authority and verification of a Queen's Council that it was legitimate evidence. Right, a QC signed off on it. Just let that sink in. So it's not some sort of speculation or some wild rabbit hole goose chase type situation, the way that the people who are trying to cover it up have tried to paint it in the past. It was legitimate documents and no one would do anything about it, and eventually it found its way into the hands of Bill Heffernan because no one... It had been around since those documents had been floating around in the background since the 1980s, and no one would do anything about it. And Bill Heffernan got a hold of him. Someone gave those to him and said, "See if you can do something with this." And he tried on 2 separate occasions publicly to make those documents publicly available and to force the government and the judiciary to act on the police information that was in those documents and bring those people to trial and to hold them accountable for their crimes. And in both of those situations, he was thwarted by the government and judicial officials themselves.
Speech in 2015, this issue of the 28 people on a list has been a very big issue in Australia on social media because the establishment don't want to talk about it. And obviously...
So the other list was a second list that listed a lot of businessmen, professional people such as doctors, judiciary members, lawyers and judges, and several politicians were on a second list that he also had that was more current as of 2015. It wasn't the same list, so there were 2. There was one that arose out of the Fitzgerald inquiry that had the 28 names, but there was a second list maybe arising out of the investigations that were conducted around the Wood Royal Commission into New South Wales police corruption, where a lot of this stuff began to come out. And it turned from just being an general inquiry into police corruption, into a very specific inquiry into police corruption in covering up for a wide-ranging and high-reaching pedophile network in New South Wales, and not just in New South Wales, but what's been released of that information indicates that it was actually the New South Wales pedophile network was connected to an international pedophile network that they proved had ties to Japan, to the UK, and to America.
One of the excuses that they keep on saying is that there's no evidence to prove that anyone of the 28 names on the list are actually pedophiles. So that's why so that's why the list continues to.
Well, that's a lie, because Bill Heffernan wouldn't have risked his political career and his livelihood. And not only that, but his personal safety and the safety of his family, had there not been indictable evidence in those documents to prove that those people were criminal pedophile people that had actually broken the criminal law of Australia. And secondly, the fact that that's all they could say about it. Well, if there's nothing there, right, that it's just a classic smokescreen, right, and gaslighting. If there's really nothing there, if it's so inconsequential, then why not make it public and put it to rest? No, because they had enough. They were police documents, mate, that proved that these people needed to be investigated, at the very least, if not outright indicted and summoned and prosecuted for the crimes that they'd committed. So that is gaslighting. And the fact that the government has gone to such deliberate pains over a fairly long, over 2 decades, right, over the period of at least 2 decades to cover this information up, right, shows you that there is plenty of proof in those documents, right? It's just that you can't get to them to see them because they are buried under layers of government suppression.
Have been talked about in terms of social media, but the official media and in terms of the official government, that ever since that speech, they've done nothing. They've done no work in relation to that list and the 28 names. Having said that, in this instance, there is no conspiracy theory. There is no lack of evidence. We have people who admit they're pedophiles, who basically say on the record what they did, how they did it, why they did it, and there's no dispute that in 1975, our national broadcaster was promoting pedophilia, and they tried to cover up the fact for 50 years, including lying to Parliament, saying that the tape doesn't exist. And obviously the other important thing is, in 50 years, they refused to apologise for the recording. And obviously I was the closest person to get to the heart of the story. And then, 2 minutes before I basically was going to reveal the horror to the Australian people, they basically said they were going to take me to court and financially destroy me. So once you really push against elite power, whether it's in the United States or Australia, they'll use any tactic that they can to try to stop you. Now, having said that, the tape's been out there. It's been over a week and a half. I have not heard anything from the ABC or their legal team. So litigation may come, and if it does, we'll handle that. I'll be able to handle that, and whatever the legal action is. But now. Last week, we actually had quite a bit of mainstream media coverage. So Daily Mail Australia and a few other publications covered in terms of the whole saga of how I got the tape and publishing it and the legal threats, etc. So it's caused a massive stir both in parts of the mainstream media as well as the social alternative media. Now, if they did commence legal proceedings against me, it would blow up the story to even a much more monumental level, and they'll have to explain to the court, why do they keep the secret for in terms of 50 years, and obviously why is enforcing their copyright in this instance so paramount to the ABC? So a lot of people think that this is the end of the story for the ABC. They're not going to want to justify their actions. They're not going to want to amplify the story and give me a bigger platform to call out their corruption. Look, again, they put a gun to my head, and I said, "You're bluffing," and I went forward, and so far, so good.
Well, it's almost like a hawk toe they really don't want to touch. I would imagine if they took you to court, if Discovery's anything, if Discovery's anything in Australia like it is in the U.S., there's going to be more to come from that. So they may want to stay away from it for that reason. Plus, it's already out. So how are they going to deny it, right? And so I think the fact that you put it out there really was the important thing. And I'm hoping that they don't proceed with any sort of legal action against you. I think it'd be foolish. I think it'd make the issue much worse, because you're going to be able to come back on social media probably through any public documents. And that's the tricky thing about legal proceedings. One of the reasons, John, that I reached out to you to cover this story, I want to give a little story of my own. As you know, my daughter was an actress for many years. She was a model and actress.
All right, good on you, John Adams. Thank you for being brave enough to do that and put that information out there. Let's hope that it stirs up a heart in the Australian people to actually see something done about it, and the larger picture, which I'm going to show you in a minute when I go through this chart, that the people of Australia might address that, not just the issue of corruption with in the ABC, because that's only the tip of the iceberg. Mate, the corruption goes all the way to the top of the government, all the way to the legislature, right? So the ABC is just a government department, and it's only acting on the policy of the people above it. So thank you again for bringing that to the attention of the Australian people and for making that information public. Thank you for sticking your neck out and doing that. Thank you very much. You're a good man for doing that. So now, having said all that, I want to take you over to the chart that I've made. So this is research that I did in 2022, as I said briefly at the beginning of this report, and it was for my own benefit and the benefit of the people around me that were interested to know the history of the way the government has suppressed this information, and particularly the information surrounding the list of 28 names and the other document and the names that were on those documents that exposed and revealed high-ranking political and social elites as being involved in the crime of pedophilia and being no doubt part of a pedophile network as such. So this chart shows over a period over 2 decades, over a period of over 2 decades, the systematic and systemic suppression of the truth about the people that are involved and entrenched in the institution of our government and our judiciary and the upper echelons of our social structure, suppresses the information that would reveal the identities and the crimes of those people. And this is the Australian government. This shows how the Australian government is directly complicit in, not just complicit, but has orchestrated the suppression of this information. So without further ado, and I need to just run through this pretty quickly because I'm starting to run out of time here. I've already almost gone for an hour to show you this stuff. But this is the real, this is what, I'm sorry to the person who asked me for this, and I've wasted time looking at other stuff. But I thought, generally speaking, if other people watch this, they might want a background and some context. So therefore, I've gone to the effort to try and provide that. But this is the list, right? This is what you're looking at. So this is the chart itself. I did it on an old Windows Word template that's very hard to transfer or doesn't integrate well with new systems. I set it out this way because at the time it was the best way that I could concisely and logically present the information in my own head from all of the research that I'd done and lay it out in a way that could be easily followed and presented. It's hard for me to actually send this document to anyone and expect that they might be able to open it because of the nature of the format. But if there's enough interest, I will actually redo it in a format that is more accessible and probably add more to it as well. Because, as I mentioned, this starts back with the Fitzgerald inquiry, the New South Wales Fitzgerald inquiry into police corruption, which took place back in 84 or 85, I believe, 1984 and 1985. So that's where that really should pick up. But our first entry here comes in at 1989. And I'm just going to read through it. And I'd like to comment more on it, but I'm running out of time, so I'll just read through it. And if people want more information, I may do a follow-up on this video and unpack some of what's here even further. But it's pretty self-explanatory. Even though the information is presented concisely, it'll definitely give you grounds for further research. And because all of this information comes out of the public domain, right? That's the most important thing. Everything that is on this chart can be verified through a search in the public domain. So, 1989, Ian Temby, head of ICAC, which is the Internal Corruption Commission designed to deal with corruption inside the government. Ian Temby, head of ICAC, receives a complaint against the shameless pedophile and podesta Justice Yeldham. That's David Yeldham. 1989. Ian Temby consults Justice Gleeson in his chambers and no further action is taken. So that is the first example of the way that the government and the judiciary worked together and worked on behalf of the high-ranking pedophiles and social elites to cover up for them. Right, so this is unofficial. This is how it starts, right? This collusion between Temby and Gleeson over the actions and the exposure that Justice David Yeldham was getting for his pedophilic and pedestry activities. So this is how it's set out to. All of the red squares, the ones that are highlighted in red, are the evidences where there's evidence of deliberate corruption in order to suppress or cover up information dealing with pedophiles that would otherwise have led to their investigation and prosecution under charges of pedophilia. 1994, May 11, New South Wales Parliament. John Hatton calls for Royal Commission into New South Wales police corruption. 1994, November 24, Supreme Court Justice James Wood commences hearings for Royal Commission into the New South Wales Police Service. 1994, December 1st, New South Wales Labor leader Bob Carr tries to stop Deidre Grieverson from using parliamentary privilege to name in Parliament 2 alleged pedophiles within the ministry and the judiciary. 1994, December 2nd, Bob Carr forces Grieverson's resignation at the behest of John Fahey, the New South Wales State Premier. 1996, March 17, the Sun Herald publishes an article by Alex Mitchell titled "Prominent People to be Named, Pedophile Bombshell," claiming, quote, "At least 2 MPs, a judge, several senior police officers, lawyers, doctors, a socialite businessman and priest will be exposed in the Police Royal Commission's pedophile inquiry starting tomorrow." 1996, March 18. Bob Carr denies his proposed private meeting with leader of the opposition to discuss the Wood Royal Commission, to discuss proposed damage control to protect pedophile exposure on either side of the Parliament. 1996, 24th of March. Private meeting late on Sunday night at New South Wales Parliament House between Bob Carr, John Della Bosca and Tony Sheehan. Discuss blocking pedophile exposure within their ranks. 1996. Private meeting between Bob Carr and Royal Commissioner Justice James Wood. Following this meeting, to use Franca Arena's words, quote, "The whole pedophile inquiry went into another stage. Despite the continuation of public hearings, we never heard of a single high-profile pedophile being named or exposed. I believe that this was due to the fact that it was decided that it was too damaging for the community to have members of the Parliament and judges exposed. So the whole matter was swept under the carpet. The Royal Commission also failed the community by failing to ask for the prosecution of some of the high-profile pedophiles in our community on whom it had evidence and witnesses." (1996) October 22nd. Franca Arena and Bob Harrison pass a unanimous motion in the ALP caucus to amend the terms of reference and provide resources to investigate New South Wales police cover-up of high-ranking or prominent pedophiles. October 22nd. In a press release, Bob Carr waters down and diminishes the extent of the terms of reference just agreed upon by his own ALP caucus. The caucus felt betrayed and requested through the ALP whip for a special meeting on October 23rd to further discuss the extended terms of reference in the Royal Commission. Again, more appropriate terms of reference were tabled to the caucus, but this time was defeated by the inferred interference of Premier Bob Carr. That might be a typo there. It might be interference of Bob Carr, not inferred, but interference, because it looks like I've messed up the typing there. So I'll read that again. And again, more appropriate terms of reference were tabled to the caucus, but this time was defeated by interference of Premier Bob Carr. 1996, November 4. Retired Supreme Court Justice and depraved sex pervert David Yeldham apparently kills himself rather than face questioning about his sexual depravity before the Wood Royal Commission. So that was the same guy that Temby and Gleeson covered for 7 years earlier. (1997) July. The Police Integrity Commission is initiated at the recommendation of the Royal Omission. That's me being smart. That's the Royal Commission, but by this stage it's become the Royal Omission. 1997, June. The Police Integrity Commission becomes the custodians of the Wood Royal Commission's records, including the 600-page plus report that John Adams referred to. What remains of those records within their possession are sealed under the secrecy provisions in the Commission's legislation from 1996. So there you have the first open systemic use of government power to suppress that information, right? Because they used legislation to suppress that information. (1997) August 26, Justice James Wood delivers Royal Commission final report. Sorry, 1997. ICAC Commissioner, Supreme Court Justice Barry O'Keefe refuses to hand over files on Justice Yeldham to the Parliamentary Committee on ICAC. (1997) September 17, Sydney Morning Herald runs an article by Ben Hills sympathising with some of the people named in the Wood Royal Commission. Mainstream media cover-up in full swing by this stage. Sympathy for the devil. (1997) September 17. New South Wales Parliament Legislative Council meeting to discuss the Royal Commission into the New South Wales Police Service final report. Both Hannaford MP and Arena MP point out Bob Carr's and the New South Wales Government's lack of response to the Wood Royal Commission's final report and recommendations. Their silence is deafening. Sorry about that. Let's go through again. Then we come forward to 2012, November 12, 2012. Julia Gillard, PM, Prime Minister, announces the government's intention to establish the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. 2013, January 11. Governor-General Quentin Bryce issues the letters patent to appoint the Royal Commission into the institutional responses to child sexual abuse. The Prime Minister summarises the Royal Commission's terms of reference. Justice Peter McKellen appointed Chair of the Commission. 2013, March 28th. Gillard Government, the Royal Commission's Amendments Bill 2013 was enacted under the Gillard Government. This authorised the Commission to sit without the necessity of all commissioners to be present at formal hearings. It also authorised members it also authorised member hearings to take evidence separate from the public hearings of the Commission. These could then be classified as private sessions. These private sessions authorised the Commission to modify or constrain the way in which victims reported the sexual abuse perpetrated against them. Once again, designed to protect the perpetrators from public exposure. So here you once again have the government, the federal government, using legislative power to protect the pedophiles and to suppress information concerning them from the public. And once again, in a royal commission that is being paid for by taxpayers' money. 2014, AFP Corp, that's the Australian Federal Police Corporation, because that's how they operate, they're a private entity, signs an MOU with the Australian Parliament House Security Council to become the sole security provider for the Australian Parliament House. So at that point, the Australian Federal Police, who have the power and should have investigated this stuff, who Bill Heffernan actually approached in 2015 to investigate this stuff, this explains why they will not actually action and investigate and prosecute these people who are mentioned in the police documents or the people who are being exposed and revealed through the royal commissions. Right, because they've actually signed an agreement with the Parliament House to become their private security. So they are their private corporate enforcers, right? So at that point, they become biased. And they're compromised by the fact that they don't want to bite the hand that feeds them. 2015, October 20, Senator Bill Heffernan presents to Attorney General George Brandis at the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Legislation Committee estimates hearing, police documentary evidence of high-profile pedophiles within the Australian government and judiciary. Again, 2015, October 20. In his public estimates hearing, Senator Heffernan calls for the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse to extend its terms of reference to include the institution of the law in its terms of reference. He justifies this by trying to table the police documents in his possession at the estimates hearing before Attorney General George Brandis. One particular document Senator Heffernan calls attention to contains a list of 28 prominent alleged pedophiles within the executive and judicial branches of the Parliament. This list was signed off by Gary Crook, not Cook, I've got Cook there, but it's Crook, by Gary Cook QC, who served as assisting counsel for the Fitzgerald inquiry in Queensland. In 2015, again with Bill Heffernan, of the documents in his possession, Heffernan states, 1. They were delivered to me by a police agency some time ago because no one seems to want to deal with them. .2, they are very disturbing. They contain a list from the Wood Royal Commission of the legal fraternity people who attended Costello's Boys Brothel Club in King's Cross. A lot of these people were still practicing law in 2015, 10 years after. At the time, Royal Commissioner Justice James Wood refused to further explore the people on the list in order to protect the public's perception of the judiciary. 2015.3 here. These documents were delivered to the AFP in Canberra, and the unopened envelope was returned by hand to Senator Heffernan because of the MOU they signed with the Parliament House. (2015.4) The documents reveal the New South Wales Police were surveillancing a judge, and the surveillance had to be dropped because of hindrance from the AFP. So now you have the AFP complicit in deliberately trying to cover up for pedophiles within the government. 2015.5 The Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse has seen these documents under an order to produce. Their response to Bill Heffernan was that they believed the information contained in the documents was outside their terms of reference. According to the terms of reference set out in the original letters patent by the Governor-General Quentin Bryce, these documents fell within the Commission's instruction to investigate the child sexual abuse of children in government institutions. Point 6. 2015.6 Every Attorney General since Ruddock has seen these documents. Some of them looked at them, some of them didn't look at them, but kept them, and some of them returned them. Attorney General Brandis was the only one who never saw them, apparently, who had refused to look at them or allowed them to be tabled at the estimates hearing, even though Senator Heffernan literally waved them in his face twice during the hearing. Once again, he didn't want anything to do with them. And you tell me there's nothing in those documents? That it's a conspiracy theory? No, brother. No. It's one of the great shames of this nation. 2016, Police Strike Force Eckersley set up to investigate criminal information made available from the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse 2015. (2019) July 25. Morrison Government. The Royal Commission's Amendment Private Sessions Bill 2019 was enacted. The function of this piece of legislation was to effectively extend the seal of all Royal Commission's victim testimony under private sessions. This was also retroactively applied. So once again, the Australian government using legislation to deliberately suppress information that would lead to the exposure and conviction of prominent high-level government and judicial profile pedophiles. 2019, July 25. Consequently, the information revealed to the Royal Commissions in these private sessions or surrounding the private session mechanism was sealed or suppressed at the archive level from public access for the duration of 99 years, counted from the time the record was made. This effectively protects the information from FOI inquiries or subpoenas from the public. (2019) Continuing on. Specifically, all information regarding victims' testimony, whether in private session or not, gathered by the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse was sealed under the same general 99-year suppression order, as well as the application of Part 4 of the amendment, where sections 60E, 60H, 60K, 60L and 60M that deal with disclosure of information in private sessions will apply to all information within the criteria, primarily victims' testimonies and evidence related to those testimonies, which was also applied retroactively. So you can see that even the Wood Royal Commission now is sealed under several layers of government legislated suppression. (2019) The bill also reinforces existing provisions for information that relates to a criminal act to be forwarded to senior police and agency personnel for further action at the behest of the victim or at the recommendation of the Commission. And yet nothing is done about it. 2021. The only reference I could find to a 90-year suppression order issued by John Howard government over the list of 28 names from the Wood Royal Commission, it appears in a submission against the Health and Other Legislation Amendments Bill, see Exhibit A. And this is the evidence. It says there should be no extension of powers, and even the current ones should be curtailed, while the public can have no confidence in our government or its senior employees. And he shows this article, I believe, actually came out of the Canberra Times, dealing with satanic cults in New South Wales and the area immediately around Canberra. While John Howard was Prime Minister, a 90-year suppression order was made against evidence, alleged evidence against 28 pedophiles, including a former Prime Minister. Senator Heffernan raised this in committee. It was one of many such orders in the federal parliament. So that was the only reference, because I'd heard that John Howard had put a suppression order on it, but that was the only reference that I could find to that on the public domain. And that may actually relate back, I'm not trying to cover for Howard because he may have done something behind the scenes that I don't have access to, but it may also relate to what I've also shown is the suppression order that was put on the report and all of the findings of the Wood Royal Commission that were archived with the Police Integrity Commission back in 1997, arising from the legislation that was passed in 1996. 2021, March 17, Morrison government. At the initial request of Ron Sackville, AO, QC, Chair of the Disabilities Royal Commission, the Royal Commission's Amendment, Protection of Information Bill 2021 was enacted. So once again, government legislation being used to add another layer of suppression to this information. This amended the Royal Commissions Act of 1902 and the Freedom of Information Act of 1982. The effect was to seal private session testimony of victims. March 20, 2021. Senator Michaela Cash, response to petition EN 1856. The letter denies the existence of a 90-year suppression order issued by the Parliament or the Federal Court over the findings of the Wood Royal Commission into the findings of the Royal Commission into Child Sexual Abuse 2015. It also refers the inquirer to the New South Wales Parliament for information on the suppression of findings from the Wood Royal Commission. It does, however, admit that the Morrison government was responsible for the Royal Commission amendments that sealed from public access all private sessions in the Commissions under a 99-year suppression order. So while denying it, they just admit to it. And that's where I ended my timeline. That was the last piece of information that I had to add to that. I believe that there was some legislation that came out in 2022 as well that I haven't yet put on the timeline because it's been a long time since I've actually worked on this or even gone back to read it. But there you have it. That is, you can see clearly from that again and again the government not just privately or in backroom deals or discussions or under the table wheeling and dealing or behind closed doors wheeling and dealing, which they've all done, right? But also publicly using government legislation has systematically suppressed the information regarding these individuals to cover up for them and to save their cronies and the reputation of the government and the judiciary from scrutiny and condemnation by the Australian public. So I hope that information is helpful. If people want more of this or want a copy of it, I can try and reformat it, and I may go back and dig and get any more information that I can to update it as a revised version of it, an extended revision of it. But yeah, that's all, and all the information that I've got here is actually available in the public domain. I have copies of it in my files, in my system. Here I can show you some of the stuff that I've got. So this was a series of news articles that have to do with Strikeforce Eckersley and the stuff about the Derek Boys Home and some of the people involved in that, and also deals with the Gosford and the Wollongong pedophile networks and the people that were involved in them, or their participation or their part in those pedophile networks, because those places were hubs, but they certainly were not the originating point of those pedophile networks. They fed into other hubs and points of origin that spread all over New South Wales, in fact all over this country, I believe, and also had international links. So to show you some of the other stuff that I've got here, so you can see there is a I do have a fair bit of information that I've dug out. And that's not all of it, but all of this information is available on the public domain. You just got to go and look for it and spend some time reading if you want to find it all. And that chart should give you some good stepping stones, who to look for and what to look for and where to look for it, if you want that historical side of the government's involvement in the suppression of the identity of high-ranking pedophiles.